just this mid-month at Davos, that jaw-dropping warning from U.S. Treasury Secretary Bessent is still echoing across Wall Street. He wasn't just pointing out some weird data glitch. He was talking about the collapse of the entire underlying logic. Let's look at the crime scene. The yield on the Japanese 10-year government bond spiked like a fighter jet running out of fuel, jumping over 25 basis points in a single day and punching right through that 4% ceiling. And while long-term rates went parabolic, the JGB futures market literally suffered a structural break. Now, some of you might ask, is 4% really that high? The U.S. is at 5%, right? That kind of ignorance is lethal in financial markets. We are talking about a country where interest rates have been grinding against the floor for the past 30 years, a place where banks practically had to pay you to take their money. For the Japanese government, which is lugging around 1 quadrillion yen in debt, a debt-to-GDP ratio of 260%, a 4% yield isn't just a number. It's a bankruptcy notice. It means that every single second, Japan's Ministry of Finance has to pay an astronomical amount of interest on that debt. Theoretically, it means the country's fiscal heart has already stopped beating. But here's the weirdest part about this catastrophic crash. The Bank of Japan, the so-called last samurai, that spent the last decade printing money like crazy to crush yields every time they even thought about rising, completely ghosted us this time. No unlimited bond-buying operations. No emergency press conferences. Just a few weak, painless comments from Finance Minister Satsuki Katayama blaming market speculation. The market didn't buy it for a second. Yields barely dipped when the officials spoke, almost as if they were mocking them, and then turned right back around to surge higher. Goldman Sachs top strategist, Rich Privarotsky, straight up defined this scene as a logical endgame. This isn't just emotional venting, it's a structural break. But what I am about to tell you today is even more brutal than Goldman's report. This is absolutely not an accident. It is definitely not the market spiraling out of control. This is a carefully calculated retreat. The Bank of Japan isn't failing to save the market. They don't want to save it. They are using this crash to achieve a dark objective they could never pull off under normal circumstances, defaulting on that massive pile of debt that they can never actually pay back. But to pull off a plan that forces the whole population to foot the bill, they can't get their own hands dirty. They need a perfect scapegoat. They need someone to stand up and light the fuse so that everything looks like political stupidity rather than a central bank conspiracy. Unfortunately, they found that person. An iron lady willing to gamble the nation's destiny for votes. Next, we're going to unmask this perfect scapegoat and see how she personally pressed the button to blow up Japan's bond market just to win the February 8th election. This is Iron Bull Finance. We help you read the global winds and position yourself for the future. To understand the Japanese bond crash of 2026, you first have to understand the woman named Sanae Takaichi. In Nagatacho, Japan's political center, she's known as the Iron Lady and privately referred to as the female Abe in a skirt. But right now, in the eyes of Wall Street, she has a much more dangerous code name, Japan's Liz Truss. Everything stems from the upcoming February 8th general election. Facing dismal approval ratings and public anger over soaring prices, Sanae Takaichi, desperate to win and keep her prime minister's seat, threw out a promise that is politically seductive but fiscally toxic: a temporary freeze on the food consumption tax. Sounds heartwarming, right? For the Japanese salaryman who can barely afford a rice ball, this sounds like a blessing from Goddess Cannon herself. But in the calculators of bond traders, this isn't welfare. It's a declaration of war. The logic is simple. The Japanese government is basically a deadbeat borrower living on credit. A huge chunk of the annual budget relies on issuing new debt to pay off old debt. The consumption tax is one of the most stable revenue sources for Japan's treasury. Now you want to cut off the fattest piece of meat just to buy votes? How exactly are you going to plug that fiscal hole? There is only one answer: issue even more government bonds. The market has a memory. The moment Takaichi yelled, "tax cuts," every veteran trader immediately flashed back to the nightmare of the UK in 2022. Liz Truss also promised massive tax cuts without explaining where the money would come from. The result? UK gilts crashed, pension funds almost blew up, the pound dived off a cliff, and she ended up as a short-lived prime minister who couldn't even outlast a head of lettuce. Today's Japan is basically the extended cut of that UK disaster. Analysts at Goldman Sachs pointed out directly that the market is pricing in Japan's Truss Moment. But this is way scarier than the UK. Britain's debt was manageable. Japan is carrying a debt mountain worth 260% of its GDP. Under that kind of load, any loosening of fiscal discipline triggers a massive hemorrhage. That is why the 40-year bond yield punched through 4% in an instant. People buying those ultra-long-term bonds are buying confidence in Japan's next 30 years. Now you retelling me the country's leader is willing to wreck the fiscal bottom line and let the deficit fly to the moon just to win an election? Why on earth would I lend you money? Selling is the only instinct capital has for self-preservation. But don't make the mistake of thinking this is just Sanae Takaichi being stupid. In the high-stakes game of political chess, there are no pure idiots. Have you ever wondered why? When Takaichi was frantically promising tax cuts, those Ministry of Finance bureaucrats, who usually obsess over fiscal discipline, didn't stand up and object? Why did the Bank of Japan choose tactical silence at the start of the bond crash? Because they need this fire. For that gang of bureaucrats who want to welch on 1 quadrillion yen of debt, Sanae Takaichi is a perfect scapegoat sent from heaven. If the central bank actively let inflation run loose, they'd get cursed to death. If the Ministry of Finance actively defaulted, they'd get sanctioned globally. But if it's a policy accident caused by a populist prime minister desperate for fame, well, that becomes forgivable. Takaichi thinks she's using fiscal policy to buy votes. She has no idea she's being used by the deeper state machine to complete a controlled demolition of the debt. So, what is the principle behind this demolition? Why do I say inflation and devaluation aren't side effects of this crisis, but the cure they've been dreaming of? Let's forget Takaichi's election show for a second and go back to a cold, hard math problem. The Japanese government currently owes about 1 quadrillion yen. Debt to GDP is 260%. What does that mean? It means even if Japan didn't eat or drink and the entire population worked for free for 2.5 years, they still couldn't pay this off. If you were a Ministry of Finance official, you'd wake up in a cold sweat every night because you know there is absolutely no way to pay this back through legitimate means, like economic growth and tax revenue. Japan's economy has been stagnant for 30 years. The population is shrinking. Hoping for a GDP explosion to dilute the debt is a pipe dream. Declaring a national default, that's suicide. Japan's credibility would hit zero instantly, and they'd turn into Argentina. So what do? Sit there and wait to die? No. In the dark corners of financial textbooks, there is a sophisticated default technique called financial repression. In plain English, it means creating high inflation and currency devaluation to make the real value of the debt go to zero. That is the core logic of the conspiracy we are seeing today. Listen to the math. If Japan's inflation rate spikes to 50%, or the yen devalues by 50%, then even though the nominal amount of that 1 quadrillion debt hasn't changed, its actual purchasing power has shrunk by half. In other words, the government borrowed a cow from you, and now they are paying you back with the same face value of money, but that money can only buy a chicken. This is a stealthy, legal, massive robbery of wealth from all creditors, including the Japanese citizens who hold government bonds. So when you see Takaichi making it rain and inflation numbers exploding, don't think it's a policy error. For the debtor, inflation isn't poison, it's the antidote. They are praying for inflation. They are praying for the yen to crash. Only then can that debt mountain crushing their lungs be moved away invisibly. Now you can finally understand the ultimate dilemma facing the Bank of Japan, what Goldman Sachs calls Sophie's choice. If they save the exchange rate, the central bank has to hike rates and stop printing money. The result? Bond yields explode, interest costs bankrupt the treasury instantly, and the Japanese government collapses on the spot. If they save the bond market, the central bank has to buy bonds without limits and suppress yields. The result? The yen exchange rate will crash like a waterfall to 170, 180, maybe even 200. Between these two poisons, which one will the politicians and bureaucrats pick? Without a doubt, they will choose to save the bond market. Why? Because a bond market crash is cardiac arrest, the government falls immediately. Currency devaluation is boiling a frog in warm water. The pain is spread out among every common person who can't afford bread. It's the lesser of two evils. Sacrificing the exchange rate and offering up the people's wealth to ensure their own survival becomes the only politically correct move. So this spike in bond yields is actually a stress test. It's the central bank sending a final signal to the market. We are getting ready to move. This time, we are sacrificing the yen to save the treasury. Facing this kind of violent macro shift, simple worry is meaningless. Rational deduction is key to help you intuitively understand the market logic behind these policies and the chain reactions that might follow. I've put together a Japanese government bond meltdown combat tactical pack. This material outlines key observation metrics and defensive strategies. I've put the link at the top of the pinned comments. I hope it gives you a cool-headed reference point for your judgment going forward. The sharks with the keenest sense of smell, Wall Street, have obviously already smelled blood. They saw through the central bank's bluff that they wouldn't dare hike rates. So, they assembled the largest shorting army in history, ready to take a massive bite out of this giant before it falls. Next, we're going to take you into this Wall Street hunt and see how those 3.5 trillion yen in short orders became the final straw that broke the camel's back. If the Ministry of Finance's conspiracy was just on paper, Wall Street's butcher knife is already raised. Look at this freshly released CFTC positioning report. In financial circles, this is a military intelligence map. Just in the week ending January 13th, the most bloodthirsty leveraged funds in the world suddenly went crazy and added 35,624 net short contracts on the yen in one breath. This isn't just a dry statistic. This is the most aggressive, vicious, and decisive weekly increase in yen shorts since 2015, over a decade. You have to understand, before this, these fund managers were actually pretty chicken. Shorting the yen has a terrifying nickname in trading circles, the Widowmaker. It means the Bank of Japan often launches surprise attacks to intervene in the exchange rate and blow up short sellers. But this time, the situation has completely changed. These sharks, who were originally watching from the sidelines, finished assembling in a single week. This level of capital movement proves only one thing. Wall Street has reached a new, absolute consensus. They are no longer afraid of the Bank of Japan's intervention. They have decided that this wounded elephant has bled out its last drop of resistance. Why does Wall Street dare to go all in right now? Because they've seen the Bank of Japan's cards. The logic of these hedge funds is cold-blooded. It's called fiscal dominance. They've done the math way better than Sanae Takaichi. As long as Takaichi wins the election and honors her tax cut promise, the fiscal deficit is guaranteed to explode. At that moment, if the Bank of Japan dares to hike rates significantly to save the exchange rate, the interest expenditure alone will instantly blow through the budget, and the government goes bankrupt. So, the central bank has only one road: forced cooperation with the government to maintain low rates and print money to buy bonds. This forms a perfect shorting loop. You don't dare hike rates? The yield spread between Japan and the US can't close, so the yen must fall. You want to issue debt and cut taxes? Money supply increases, so the yen must fall. For Wall Street, this is no longer a gamble, it's free money. They aren't betting on whether the Japanese economy is good or bad. They are betting that the Bank of Japan doesn't have the guts to pull the trigger. It's risk-free arbitrage. These 35,000 short contracts are Wall Street's pledge of allegiance to the collapsing yen system. Even more ironic is that the ghost-like carry trade is also fueling this crash. Because they are certain Japan won't dare hike rates, global speculative capital is once again frantically borrowing cheap yen from Japan and swapping it for dollars and euros to buy Nvidia stock or US treasuries. Japan has been reduced to a free ATM for the global financial market. Capital is flowing out endlessly, further draining the yen's blood. The government wants to default. Wall Street wants to make money. In this frenzy, both sides have reached a terrifying, unspoken agreement. The only losers are the ordinary people holding yen, working hard, only to find their money is worth less and less. When the 160 exchange rate defense line gets poked through like paper, and the price of imported oil and food doubles, who will pay the final price for this financial game? Now, let us cut the camera from Wall Street back to a convenience store in Tokyo and see how this crash becomes an invisible looting of ordinary people. The yen breaking 160 or even heading to 180 is just a resistance level breakout in trading terms. But in the lives of ordinary Japanese people, it's the sound of a wound being violently ripped open. Look at this humble rice ball. In 2022, it was 110 yen. Now it's 160 yen. You might say, it just went up a few cents. What's the big deal? You are dead wrong. Behind this rice ball lies Japan's most fatal weakness, resource scarcity. What kind of country is Japan? It relies on imports for almost 100% of its oil, natural gas, and coal. Its food self-sufficiency rate is only 38%. The other 62% depends on others to feed them. When the exchange rate defense collapses and 160 becomes the new normal, it means every liter of gas you pump in Tokyo, every bag of flour you buy at the supermarket, every hour you run the heater at home, the cost is doubling. This is the cruelty of imported inflation. You didn't do anything wrong, but your money just evaporated into thin air. It's an extremely absurd picture. For foreign tourists, Japan right now is paradise. A top-tier omakase dinner costs a third of what it does in New York. A Chanel bag is cheaper than in Paris. Japan is turning into a bargain bin nation. Its labor, its services, its assets are being bottom-fished by global capital at cabbage prices. But for the Japanese people living there, it's a visceral pain. This is also the black hole that Sanae Takaichi's so-called tax cuts can never fill. You save that 8% consumption tax, but prices go up 30%, 50%. This is a stealthy and cruel wealth transfer. The government diluted that 1 quadrillion debt by printing money. Wall Street took away the chips by shorting. And the only ones paying the bill are the ordinary people saving yen bit by bit. Their savings turned into waste paper. Their pensions turned into bubbles. Don't think this is just Japan's bad luck and has nothing to do with us. If you think that, you are too naive. Japan is the canary in the global financial coal mine. It is the country with the most serious aging population and the heaviest debt burden. It's just the first one to fall. Look at the US, look at Europe. Who isn't carrying massive debt? Who hasn't played the money printing game? Japan's debt massacre today is a prophecy for the entire global fiat currency system. When the debt snowball gets so big it can't be repaid, every sovereign nation will face that Sophie's choice. Choose national bankruptcy or choose to sacrifice the common people's money. History tells us they will always choose the latter. So, in an era where sovereign credit is teetering and currency purchasing power could hit zero at any moment, how do we save ourselves? Do we sit and wait to die, or do we put on a life jacket ahead of time? Don't go anywhere. At the end of this video, I am going to give you the final prime directive and tell you exactly what to hold on to before this ship sinks. Friends, we've reached the end. The truth about this annual blockbuster drama featuring the Bank of Japan, Sanae Takaichi, and Wall Street is out. Please remember this sentence. The so-called crash isn't a rollover caused by driver error. It is the state machine cutting off its own arm to survive. For this massive debt entity called Japan, the exchange rate is just an arm, but fiscal solvency is the heart. To keep the heart from stopping, to keep the government from going bankrupt, they didn't hesitate to chop off the arm named exchange rate. Even though the scene is bloody and terrifying, for the operators, it was the only way to live. They successfully diluted that 1 quadrillion yen of dead debt into a repayable number through devaluation and inflation. It was a perfect financial surgery. The only thing is, the blood on the operating table came from the arteries of common citizens. So in this turbulent moment, as ordinary people, how do we avoid becoming the cost on that operating table? I'll give you one final prime directive. Abandon the fantasy of paper wealth and embrace hard assets. Stop believing the ghost stories from politicians about maintaining a strong currency. In a cycle where sovereign nations universally default via inflation, all fiat currencies, whether it's the yen, the euro, or the dollar, are essentially a block of melting ice. Your only way out is to find things that cannot be diluted by a money printer. Gold, that's the monetary consensus of thousands of years. Bitcoin, that's the anti-inflation arc of the digital age. Real estate in core cities, that's a scarce resource in the physical world. These are the only life buoys you have in the flood. The cards of this gamble have been flipped. Sanae Takaichi wants votes. The Bank of Japan wants debt liquidation. Wall Street wants violent profits. They all won, or they are about to win. And at this table, if you are still foolishly holding cash, if you still believe in the quiet life, then you are the only cost. Of course, Investing is a marathon. Only by staying rational and keeping your cognition online can you stand firm through the cycle. Regarding the asset allocation details and specific coping strategies mentioned in the video, I've summarized them all in that Japanese government bond meltdown combat tactical pack. You can pick it up in the comments section. Treat it as a desktop reference. Be prepared and handle it with composure. If this episode helped you see the other side of the market more clearly, please hit that like button. Your like helps more investors see the truth. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Iron Bull Finance. When the wind changes direction next time, you will be the first to receive the signal.